The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave. I'm joined here with my co-host Greg, and we are having a great time.
Book club
Tonight.
Dave's book club. That's what this is this week.
What was our last book?
Frankel.
That was our last book, was Frankel? Okay.
Yeah.
And then before that, we did the
Poe.
blanking. We did Poe, and then we did Camus, and someone else.
The Alchemist.
Milton.
Yeah, let's not forget about The Alchemist.
So
yeah, this is your choice, and I enjoyed it.
We are starting to have a little book club collection here.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah. So we are so eclectic.
I mean, you're not going to tell me.
The Eclectic Therapist's Guide to Everything is the name.
That was taken.
It was taken. But yeah, we got books, we got movies, we got other stuffs.
Mm-hmm. Disorders.
Before we get started, Greg, I did give you a heads up. I want to just give a little dedication for this episode. Over the weekend, unfortunately, one of our listeners, a coworker of mine, and also a buddy, passed away. He was only 35. His name is Ricardo. I just wanted to give a quick dedication for this episode to him. Super sad, medical complications and whatnot, and he, will be greatly missed. And I hope that his family is holding up okay. It's never a good time to lose anyone, but right over the holidays is super tragic. So
yeah, that's tough. I'm sorry, Dave.
Yeah, just wanted to give that shout out.
But we will honor him by doing the best we can with this and future. I'm sure we'll find a way to do our best to,
Yeah, absolutely. This is also sort of a tragic story, this book. And I think that's one of the things that drew me to this book, because the reason I'm even familiar with it is it was required reading for numerous courses that I've taken over the years. And I'm not going to lie, the first couple of times I didn't read it because I often didn't read the assigned readings because I sucked at school.
Yeah.
And then I kind of started to get serious with school, and I started doing the readings, and I was like, wow, they actually sometimes assign some good stuff.
No, most times. That's the thing that it's wasted. That's why youth is wasted on the young, I swear. Because I was the same way. It's like these books that you kind of get to read in college and even in high school. It's like you're reading them for a reason. They're standing the test of time for a reason. And before you talk about the author, let me just kind of give this sort of overview of this book, because it's short, but it is heavy, and I think there's a lot to take away from it. Same way that with The Alchemist, same with Frankel. It's short, but it packs a punch, right?
Yeah. So
the setting is important. It's in the late 1800s, the village of Umofia, which I think is fictional.
Yes, I believe so.
So it tells the story of a Okonkwo, and it's it tells this complex story of this guy's life. And that's I'm using that word purposefully, because in some ways this is a story about imperialism and the Europeans conquering other countries with this sense that, hey, look, we're doing this to make it better for the citizens there. We're occupying the land of this lesser race, and our presence will make them better for it. And yeah, granted, it's lucrative to us and everything, but the inhabitants of these lands are really benefiting from us being here, right? That's the whole idea. And if you look at a culture from the outside, you see how obscure and different and strange they can be. But once you sort of immerse yourself on the inside, you start to see all the similarities. And this story does a really good job of showing that. All the same kinds of people rise to the top in this civilization, the orators, those are politicians, warriors, businessmen, religious leaders. It's just this idea that it seems primitive when you're looking at them, but once you're in it, you're like, oh, this is exactly the same.
And where there's probably a little bit of a disconnect into today's society of how relatable their culture was compared to other cultures. Do you remember when we talked about fame and we talked about what would make someone famous back, prior to like rock stars and movie stars?
Mm-hmm.
It was what kind of figures were famous? War heroes.
Warriors.
Right? Warriors,
Yeah.
war heroes, anybody who basically fought for their country. And that's very much present in this story and this society that they're describing to us. The fame comes with achievements. It comes with, gaining your fame through doing things for your tribe. They're not just like born to like a socialite family and then they're famous.
Yeah, no, it's what's kind of like almost more evolved about it, and we'll talk about that, is that in this culture, your deeds, it's almost like a meritocracy. Like the things that you do are what make you successful or not. And when we start talking about the story, we're going to see that with Okonkwo and his father, and how that really, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. We'll see. But before we get into the story, like you wanted to say something about the author, right?
Yeah. So Chinua Achebe was born in 1930. So he was born in an Igbo village. His father became Christian. So I thought that was an interesting parallel because obviously some of the themes of this story that things fall apart may have been even present in his own life and reflections of his own upbringing and kind of his feelings about his own upbringing. He like immersed himself in Western lit as a student and had this turning point when he was tasked with reading a book called Mr. Johnson. It was which was a 1939 novel set in Nigeria, but written by an Anglo-Irish author by the name of Joyce Carey.
Okay.
Now the professor that, according to my sources, the professor, said that this is a great example of, Africa and just kind of like the depiction of that society. And this really upset Chinua, who was like, this is so far removed from who we are and our society. And it's actually like, this is very much like Western civilization's version of us. And
yeah, it's such a pretentious thing to think that we can decide what other cultures. We do this so much in our society now, like what other cultures, what they like about themselves, what they don't like about themselves, what's offensive to them. Like we really think that from the outside looking, we have a better understanding of what's best for people. We still do it. It's just a strange thing.
It is. So Chinua Achebe graduated from college in 1953. In the 50s, he was part of this generation of West African writers who felt like Western literature was basically holding their continent back. So their representations were holding them back. And this became like the goal for him was really to kind of reclaim their culture, their continent, and get a better depiction of what it was like or what it's like in Africa versus like these depictions where they're depicted as being alien, barbaric, frightening, and just having nothing to do with their art or their culture. So I thought that was rather interesting, hearing the intentions, because that definitely comes across in this novel. And you and I were just talking about this, before air, how there's a large portion of this novel that's just like dedicated to cultural depictions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you said like that feels very intentional.
It does.
So it is.
It does,
right?
because when he talks about that professor, maybe he's thinking about that professor who wrote this book, and now it's like, hey, look, these people, now you understand this society and this culture, but you don't at all, because you're getting a little flash of it and you're not getting the whole immersive story of what it's really like to be in this culture. And that's what I think he tries to show us here. It's like, hey, look, this, you don't know what you're talking about. This is what it is. Almost the monotony and like the infighting and the family drama. It's all really like, it's just shows the depth of the people.
Yeah. I mean, it's different. it looks and sounds different than anything that like over here we would be familiar with. But as you're reading it, you start to see the relation, like how relatable it all is. So
Absolutely.
it's definitely different versions of things that exist in our own society. It just looks different because it's in a different place, in a different setting. It should be different. There's no reason it would look
Exactly.
the exact same.
Yeah,
Um,
we'll talk about all that too.
so he was 28 when this was published in 1958. This was his first novel, which I mean, that's pretty impressive considering the notoriety, the acclaim that this novel has received. It's sold more than 10 million copies. It's been printed in 45 different languages. In many places, it's required high school reading or college reading. In my case, I think I had at least 3 courses. Maybe I did first have it in high school, but I had at least 3 courses in college that required this reading. And
28.
initially,
Oof.
initially, it was passed on by publishers who doubted that African fiction would sell. So
And
obviously
what's
that was proven
interesting is
wrong.
like their culture is such good storytellers too. That's part of this too. Where
Yeah.
the
But
storytelling is so
they
good.
thought in Western civilization we wouldn't be interested in this story, I guess. Just to give a full circle summary of Chinua Achebe. He in 1990 was in a car accident in Nigeria that left him paralyzed from the waist down, which is rather unfortunate. And then he died actually in 2013 at the age of 82. So he has passed at this point. But super impressive life. This is the first of a bunch of novels, and this is obviously probably his most famous one, I would say.
Okay, so let's talk about the story. It's broken down to 3 sections. The first section is sort of just we're learning who Okonkwo is, who's the main guy we're going to talk about. And what we learn about him almost initially is his identity is centered around becoming everything his father wasn't. So his
Yeah.
father,
Right.
Anoka, is that so? That's where I'm just going to
Anoka.
say these
Anoka.
names the way I kind of read them.
Anoka.
So his father, Anoka, was weak and
Lazy.
so Okonkwo, everything he wanted, he was like, my father was weak, so then I'm going to be strong. I'm going to be everything he wasn't. And he was so concerned with being not his father that he really never developed his own identity.
So he in his mind, his identity was just everything my father is, I'm the opposite.
Exactly.
So he's lazy, I'm insanely driven and structured and persistent. And he's irresponsible. Conquo is probably the most responsible person alive. So, his father had a bunch of debts, and that was like a big thing for him. Was someone actually goes to collect a debt, and he laughs at the guy and says, "I haven't even paid this guy over here."
Yeah.
So
I got a lot of things going on.
I'm gonna pay him first, then I'll pay you. So I mean, that kind of just shows the type of personality his father was, and his father was someone I feel who was more concerned about living in the present than living anywhere else, right? He didn't want to live in the future.
So there are some things there you're mentioning, like he's irresponsible and, so this fear, that's almost like Okonkwo's personality. It's his fear of becoming his father. So he's like kind of afraid of who he is. Like, who will I be if I'm not careful to not be my father?
He's afraid of his future.
Absolutely.
He can't even enjoy the moment because he's so fearful of what enjoying the moment would do to his future, right?
Yeah. And you're making me think too. So if he's everything his father isn't, and those, so he's not going to be in debt and he's not going to be weak. But his father is also this kind of sensitive, compassionate guy. So he's not going to be any of those things either. He's going to his children, he's going to beat them. He's going to beat his wives to the point where he's holding guns at his wives every once in a while. So he doesn't take any kind of anytime there's emotion, he beats his family.
And not only does he have these expectations for himself, but he has these expectations for anyone who's connected to him.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't meet his expectations, like you said, you're going to get a beating because he is so afraid, not just of his own decisions and choices, but how the choices of his wives are going to impact him, how they're going to reflect on him, because ultimately he is just very concerned with how other people view him.
You're right. That's what it is. It really is this thing of it's not becoming who you want to be. He's not living his life based on the things he wants. He's living his life based on how other people view him. How many of us do that? Like we live our lives based on the things we don't want to happen instead of the things that we want in our
Sure.
lives. And that's kind of like a terrible place to be. That's not becoming somebody. It's hard to become somebody.
Isn't that like a quality you can envision being very present in like 20 somethings where you maybe haven't figured out your full identity at that point. You're still kind of becoming who you are, and you're so worried about what that's going to be. And I think that one of the things that I appreciated about later in life is you stop worrying about that a little bit because you're like, you kind of know who you are.
And you don't care.
And you don't care. And you know who you're not. And you know what you can't be. And you just get an acceptance. And I think that's the power of age. Okonkwo never really demonstrates that.
No, and because you know what the problem is? Every time he's at a moral crossroad, he makes the wrong decision. Like because he doesn't really have like a moral compass, it's not really like who he wants to be. He's not making his choices based on that. So he doesn't really have values or anything. He just knows that he's got to do the opposite of what his father would do. So he gets through he gets a stepson, I would say, kind of like this Ika Mefuna kid.
Yes.
He sort of earns this kid's
very important figure in this book.
Oh, absolutely. So in this tribe, like something happened.
Everyone loves this kid.
Everyone loves this kid. Something happened with a neighboring tribe, and this kid is sort of like payment for some misdeed that another tribe did to him. So he got this kid living in his house.
This Ika Mefuna is the one sign we get of Okonkwo having like a nurturing side.
Yeah,
he is the glimpse. Like he is Achebe's little antithesis of what we think Okonkwo probably has in him, but was too afraid to show everybody. So he has a soft spot for this boy. He appreciates a lot of the qualities that this boy has, the impact this boy has on his own kids, and just everything about him. He clearly loves this boy.
Yeah, he's like, this kid gets it. Like Ika Mefuna is like this tough leader, and he's just a natural Okonkwo. Like everything Okonkwo finds value in, this kid does it. And at some point, because this kid was given to this tribe, the oracles decide that he has to be killed. That was the deal, like early on, and it was just kind of forgotten about. So instead of showing up and being like, no way, we're not going to like do this to this guy. I ended up falling in love with this kid. Like this would be a show of strength to like go against what other people would think. But in an attempt to not seem weak, he ends up being the one to actually kill him, which I think in a lot of ways destroys him.
I think though his intention is he would rather do it than have someone else do it. Like, part of it, I think, is yes, that like I want to present as the strongest. I can do this. This will, I can kill him. I don't have a soft spot or whatever. But I also think there's a part of him that wants to do it so that I don't know. It's like this sense of I don't want someone else to do it because.
No, I get it. I know I do. But I think that what the important thing, maybe Achebe, or maybe I'm just seeing from it, is that here's this opportunity to show the ultimate strength. Now, are you going to be able to do that? Are you going to be able to go against what the tribe, like, because you know that the right thing is for this kid to live. Are you going to be able to go against the tribe, or are you going to use this opportunity to just show what you think or what you hope is the absolute strength?
So, and what that really highlights is Okonkwo really doesn't know what makes someone strong. Mm-hmm. He only knows the things that are tangible, that are right in front of him. So he knows that if you can gain fame from personal achievements. He wrestles and things like that. He was 18 and he defeated someone who had been undefeated for like 7 years prior, and he gained a lot of like notoriety from that, and he had his own farm. Just like all these things, these are like tangible examples of what makes someone strong, and that Okonkwo understands. What Okonkwo doesn't understand is those internal things that also demonstrate strength.
Like he doesn't understand that, hey, your body's really hurting right now and it's telling you like this isn't right. And he can't hear that because you're right. He doesn't know what strength is. He knows that that people thought his dad wasn't strong, and he knows what his dad was like. That's all he knows.
So if we bring it to that level, we also know his dad probably would have chosen to not kill the boy because of his love for him, right? So if his dad was in Okonkwo's shoes and he had the same feelings that Okonkwo has for the boy, he would have said, I can't do this, or he would have tried to plead for his case or something. He would have done something to try to prevent the boy's death. Okonkwo knew that, so then he says, I can't do any of those things because that's what my dad would have done. Well, that's what he says to himself.
That's what he says to himself. Not in the book or anything. That's what we're assuming he's saying to himself.
Yeah. That was like my own reading.
What's interesting is this is really damaging to him. And then there's the very next thing that happens is there's this celebration for a feast, right? Yep. One of his friend's son is a great warrior, and they're all shooting guns into the air, having a good time. And somehow Okonkwo's gun fires and it misfires and it ends up killing this kid. And so he's banished for 7 years. Which is weird. It comes up a few times. So 7 years he's banished. 7 years every time the locusts come. There's like 7 is mentioned throughout the story. A bunch of times.
7 deadly sins.
Yeah, maybe
7-year plague.
Okay,
is that a thing?
7 it wins in craps, until it loses.
Brad Pitt and Kevin Spacey in 7.
That's right.
All right, it's all coming together.
It's all coming through now. So it's interesting, and hopefully we can get some time to talk about this at the end. So what he committed here was an accidental crime, what they call in the tribe a female crime. So there's definitely some messed up masculinity here, and it's a female crime because it was accidental, as if to say that any crime that is mistake, that's a female crime. Any crime that's intentional and took thought is a male crime. But if you really read the story, the females, the women in the story are the ones that show the true strength over and over and over again. And that's intentional too. Like his second wife protecting the daughter through there's a lot of mystical stuff that goes on, but that there is some there. I like that Achebe was able to, and we'll talk about some of the things like the way they treat like disfigured children or twins or their thoughts on masculinity. He doesn't pull punches. He doesn't say, hey, look, this is a perfect society. You got it all wrong. There are some things that we could look at and be like, well, this is kind of backwards. Right. And I think that's on purpose.
And that's what makes this so effective. It really looks like a realistic tribe. It looks real, because if it was perfect, this fictional story would be a fantasy story, right? Yeah. Instead, it's like this real depiction of what life is like in a tribe. And I think that those dualities, those contrasts, those contradictions are all part of what makes this feel so relatable and so real.
Yeah. And there's that concept of cultural relativity where it's just because we look at something you do in your culture and decide that in our morality that's wrong. How can we say that to you? How is that? Who are we to say that, to decide what's right or wrong in your own culture?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a complicated one.
Another thing that I thought was funny was Okonkwo is described as this intimidating person, and he knows it, and he uses it to his advantage. That's part of his whole personality is intimidation, just as much as his strength and all that other stuff. The description of what makes him so serious is his bushy eyebrows. Yeah. And it just that's such a weird thing I never thought about. That makes him intense. And, and his bounce in his walk.
And he's able to defeat the cat in wrestling. So yeah,
he is the cat.
Oh, he's the cat.
They call him the cat because his back never touches the ground when he wrestles.
Oh man,
he is the cat.
I like that.
He's he's got a spring or something. I don't know. It's just interesting. Just everything about him just embodies misogyny. And
Yeah,
like
and we have to
masculinity.
talk about that at the end, because he is the example of toxic masculinity, and not to say that his qualities are all wrong. It's just that they're all kind of misguided and for the wrong reasons. But let's talk about now. We've learned who Okonkwo is, but now he gets exiled. So he did that thing. He did this accidental crime, and now he had to leave his house, his homeland, his whatever, and go back to where his mother came from. And I think this is kind of an interesting thing where everything you have could be disrupted and gone in a second. Now that's relatable too. That's just kind of the way things are in reality.
He got
too.
canceled.
He did get canceled. They were like, you got to get out of here, dude. This is a lot.
This
Come
is
back
a
in
bad-
7 years.
This is a bad look for our culture and our society. You
Mhm.
got to go. We'll let you back later when everyone's forgiven you.
And as this is going on, so he's doing all right. He's thriving as he does. He finds a way to make things work. But this is when he starts hearing things about a new faith coming and the missionaries. And, some of the people in the tribe are like, well, they don't throw away babies. And that's pretty attractive for some converts, especially the pregnant ladies. They probably like, oh, this religion sounds okay. And, some of the things that seem savage, they're thinking, well, this seems a little bit more accepting. And a lot of people start gravitating towards these missionaries, and the missionaries start to gain some power in the community, which ironically, the white missionaries are teaching them things that like prejudice against each other, like the warring tribes is like, that's anti-Christianity. I mean, how insane is that? And there's also a historical lesson here, like this whole divide and conquer thing. We see that politically now where, kind of like pitting groups against each other, and the infighting between these clans made them weak. That's very similar to what happened in North America, right? The infighting between the tribes made them very weak. And it's kind of a similar thing is happening to us right now, where we're always kind of looking at our differences instead of being, strong together. It's like they laugh, they laughed at the Puritans, they laughed at like the Pilgrims, the Separatists, whatever they were, and they were laughing at the Europeans in Nigeria. And it just kind of makes me think, like, who's infiltrating us now? Like, we are very, at each other's throats all the time. And now who's pulling the strings right now that we're kind of unaware of? And who are we, we laugh, who are we laughing at? I don't know. It's just something that makes you think. It just happens in society and humanity over and over and over again. And it's a really scary thing.
Yeah. I also wanted to just highlight, you mentioned the missionaries and how they were able to have some people kind of convert somewhat easily, it seemed like.
Yeah.
If you think about it, it must have seemed so attractive because these individuals come in and they just have this sense of like, I can teach you things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this idea that like, the things that they will teach them would benefit their lives, better their society, just as a whole, make them more sophisticated, quote unquote. That must have been such a challenging thing for those individuals who are from the tribe to resist. It must have seemed so alluring. Like these strange people come in, they're dressed in clothes, in like actual clothes, which probably looked funny, but at the same time, it's like seeing someone wearing like high fashion, and we'd be like, "Oh, that looks silly," but also I kind of really want to wear it. Like that would look awesome on me. So I can only imagine how alluring that feeling must have been for them when that.
Plus, they were really tough on the people on the fringes. Like, if you didn't fit, if you weren't really strong or really like useful, then you were kind of on the fringes of society. And this is a great way to, how the Christians are. We're like, hey, we'll take the weak, we'll take everyone. We just want, followers. That's all we're looking for right now. And at the same time,
so you are like this person that like feels like you don't fit in, or you're not sure about your own contributions. You feel a little bit like, oh, I don't think people accept me. And suddenly somebody's going to accept you. It's like cults.
Yep. It's like Okonkwo's dad would have just loved this. He would have been like, all right, I'm with these guys in a second. And think about how easy it would be, either, if the shoe was on the other foot, either way, how you could go somewhere and like poke holes in their religion, in their religious beliefs. I mean, the sacred tree, and then the the Christians chop it down and nothing happens to them. It's like, okay, well, but what's interesting is the Christian people did have this leader, Mr. Brown or Pastor Brown. I don't know if but he actually, there's this great sort of scene in the book where he tries to sell his religion to one of the clan leaders, one of the higher ranking religious leaders in the village. But he realized that like everything he was saying, this guy had an answer for. Mr. Brown was saying, look, we have you're using those little sticks, those are like idols, like those are just representations of your God. And he's like, yeah, well, you have a cross around your neck, that's just a representation of your God. And like kind of like goes through all these things where it's like point for point he's matching Christianity, and it's insightful. And I'm almost like towards the end of it, and I'm like, am I like a different religion right now at the end of this? You know what I mean? Like, do I need to go in the woods right now? Like, it was really impressive how he was able to do that. And then the pastor was like, all right, so this full frontal assault on this religion isn't going to work. I'm going to have to do something a little differently and like develop schools and infrastructure and make this tempting in other ways, like money, really, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, and that is a great point though about that they came in with this idea that they were selling these primitive individuals this like luxury of their religion and their culture and sophistication. And then they start to see that like, oh, well, maybe we're not all that different. So we have to find ways to make this different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that the missionaries were not always, as we'll see later on a little bit, but it's the people sending them and the government. I think like Mr. Brown as a pastor, and I think that's why he makes this point. I think he really does believe that he's doing God's work and he is trying to save souls or something. And it's just like misguided, because once this Mr. Brown guy, he gets sick and leaves, they send a different guy and things just spiral quickly. Like the converts start getting a little more aggressive. Like, I don't know if you remember this, that there was like these 9 masked spirits, and they were similar to the 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Like, they were obviously the elders in the community, but they would put these masks on and like had this elaborate ceremony where people would think they were gods. And one of the converts killed one of these people. And that's like, all right, it just seems such a rude, like sacrilegious kind of move where it's like, you just killed it. You just kind of like poked a hole in our whole like belief system, and it's messed up on so many levels, right?
Yeah.
I just didn't. That was hard to deal with.
Here's something that I was like curious about when I was, hearing about Achebe's bio. So his dad became Christian, right? And I was wondering, a lot of this is obviously his own reflections on things that he's observed and attitudes and perspectives of, the way people view his culture, right? His own ethnic culture. And it made me curious if like some of what he was highlighting in Okonkwo's dad was kind of his own feelings about his own dad in some ways.
His dad would have to be sort of weak in a way to change religions, you saying?
Right.
Like,
but I also think that he gives Okonkwo's dad these characteristics that Okonkwo rejects, but very clearly as the reader, we're not supposed to fully reject him. Right. Like we know, because nobody does. Nobody reads this book.
Yeah, we're like, we get it. We get the sitting around not paying your bills. We get
it. we're on board with that.
Yeah.
And Okonkwo's way like over the top with like how structured and intense he is. So like there's this huge, difference between the two of them. And I think he's like trying to highlight that probably the ideal is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And maybe that's his own coming to terms later in life with his dad converting to Christian.
That's a great point, that the ideal is somewhere in the middle. Like we're learning things from each other, because I thought, there's some great things in their society that were, even better than our society. But it's like, should we be throwing away twin babies to the woods, to the evil spirits in the woods? Sure. Like maybe that's something we could work on.
And isn't there so many cultures that have things like that? Like
Spartans were that way. Like any kind of disfigurement on the baby, just throw them. Yeah. Toss them,
put them out in a basket, and put them out.
That's what animals do.
Yeah,
I'm not saying like it's that is primitive. in a sense. And
Compared
I mean,
to
it's a
modern cultures, it definitely is. Yeah.
right, yeah. So it's like it's complicated. We have to say that's not right because we evolve into thinking that's not right. But why the purposes for what they do that, why they do that, I don't know. Like maybe they kill a lot of babies in this, don't they?
Yeah.
Which
Yes.
is,
For sure.
it's hard to get behind that.
It's a little
You know what
hard
I
to.
mean?
I just feel like there's obviously there's this this disdain for individuals who are very readily able to lose their cultural identity.
Mhm.
But I also think that there's at the same time sympathy or empathy for them demonstrated in this novel. Like showing his dad being this guy who would probably throw away his whole cultural identity, but then also making him somewhat of a relatable or understandable or sympathetic character or somewhat likable character. I think that's a really interesting choice to make.
Yeah, because that's what true strength is, though, being able to or true identity. Like his father had an identity and he didn't.
Mm.
That's something like his father would have known what to do with Ike Mifuna. Instead of he wouldn't have killed him with a machete. He would have been like, you know what, this tribe's wrong. I'm not killing this kid. I'm going to be
Ah,
with him, and whatever you think about me, you think about me.
so his dad is the epitome of, hey, just because this is the way it's always been done doesn't mean it's the right way to do
Right,
it.
right. I
It's the
hate my
right
dad because
decision.
he knew himself, and I don't know myself.
Yeah. So I think Chinua really relates to Okonkwo from what I'm reading in this, but also sees that there's something to be said about the dad and
The other thing
his
that
perspective.
Okonkwo does that I've kind of, as I was reading it, I was like, oh, I do that too. He talks about how the younger generations are like deteriorating the whole
Yeah.
society and their culture. And it's like, geez, if that's not a relatable conversation as I get older, and I watch my kids play video games, and I'm like, you're not gonna ever, be around a girl. Like
Yeah.
you're not gonna be okay out there. Like you're not developing a personality. Like when I was your age, I find myself saying that so much. Like when I was your age, I would be outside, I would be doing things, I would be like getting myself into these like situations and figuring my way out of them, and you're missing all that.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I'm like, well, so what happens to the future? Is it over? As if to say, like, I had all the like the only right way to grow up was the way I did.
Yeah.
And I don't know, something, do you do that too?
I mean, I definitely look at for a period of time, I think I was definitely doing it a lot where I was kind of hyper focused on like work ethic of
Mm,
younger
I
generations.
wrote that down. That's a big one.
And it's so funny because like the one of the things that's caused me such a hard time is adjusting to this new way of that people look at work. Younger generations look
Mhm.
at work as like, what can that job offer me? What's the benefits to me working there? Things like that, which are things I never considered at any point in time when I was looking for a job. It was always like, what can I offer you? How
Yeah.
do I fit into your bigger plan? And now younger people are going into workplaces asking the exact opposite. And I think that's something that to me, I viewed it for a long time as like, wow, that's really entitled. But it's
Yeah.
also sort of awesome.
Yeah, because that's the thing too, right? So here you and I mean, two very similar work ethics,
Yeah.
which is like, hey, look at these idiot kids only working a few hours a day as we're working multiple jobs and not going to bed, getting
Yeah.
6 hours of sleep every night at the most. And it's like, oh wait, maybe there's something to be said for that. Like maybe that is the way to go. And making, companies are going to need people to work for them, and just making them want you. I guess
So
that's
because it's different, we reject it
absolutely.
because of what was instilled in us from previous generations. And they probably looked at us for a while, like thinking we were lazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I
Because
remember,
we weren't
even
running yam farms, or whatever.
this is a yam heavy book too. I mean,
It
they just
is.
like only eat yams. I don't know. I don't know if I get behind that. But so what happens with Okonkwo is, there's this turmoil between the tribe and the white settlers or imperialists or however you want to view them, and he doesn't really have the backing that he wants. Like how would
Right.
you describe this?
I feel like this is a moment where he has an expectation in his mind of what people are going to feel about it, how they're going to support him because he's willing to do whatever
He's willing
for
to do
the
whatever.
community, right? To keep the traditions alive, to keep the culture alive. He will do anything. And all he needs in order to do that is to know that they all back him, right?
Mhm.
I feel like that's literally all he needs.
Acceptance, right?
Acceptance. He needs them to tell him, you are our strong leader and we need you. And he doesn't get that.
No, and he has this great opportunity where it's like everything he's ever wanted in his entire life is finally in his hands. It's like, all right, you're basically going to lead the charge in this. We're all looking to you to get this done for us. And then when the real action starts to happen, the first time he's faced with adversity from the white group, from the settlers, what does he do? He kills one immediately. There's no like tact. There's no thinking, how do I make this work? It's just machete, kill.
Yeah, so they confront him, or they approach him, and what is it that they say that sparks that response? Do you remember?
I don't remember exactly what was said.
So they just come in and they say a statement to him, right? And I can't remember, some kind of direction. I think like you have to do this or you have to do that or something.
Yeah.
And he immediately turns around, and you know what? That to me symbolized all the pent up anger, but fear.
Mhm.
I feel like it was like a fear response too. Like, you're not going to tell me what to do. I'm the leader here, and everybody's seeing you tell me something, tell me to do something. How are they going to view me if I listen to you?
Well, he never developed into a person. He never figured out who he was. He never became into his own identity. He's still that person who's afraid of what everyone thinks, who doesn't want to be their father. And he thought, maybe, I think in a moment, like this was like the crossroads, the major crossroads, where it was like he would either kind of learn some restraint and some tact and be like, I'm strong and I have these people following me, but I also have to take some of these elements of my father that was good. I have to take some of these, lessons that I've learned through my entire life of keep falling back and getting into more and more trouble. Can I finally now use my brain and do the right thing? And no, he just can't. And I think after doing that, after realizing that he blew his one chance, I think that's what causes him to, end his life. And that's what he does, which is horrific. It's a sad story.
That's how you're going to tell everybody. That's the big climax of the story. And you just say it like that.
Yeah, that's the big one. I mean, so there's so many reasons why, all his purpose was sucked out of his life, he thought.
Yeah. I have this vision when I would read that part of the novel. And the first time I read that, I was like,
I was surprised.
Oh, yeah, it's like it's a very surprising and sudden ending, and it's like that is not what I expected to happen here. I had this vision of him just kind of like having this overwhelming moment where he's looking around and he's just seeing everybody around him leaving him, right? Because they're losing their identity, their cultural identity. They're giving in to the white man, quote unquote. It's like it just had this vision of him just feeling surrounded by everybody losing the fight that he was so ready for. And he just can't take it. He realizes he has no following. No one's looking at him as strong anymore. He has no purpose. He has no meaning.
Yeah, when he did that, everyone was like, all right, so this isn't the guy. He can't really lead us. He's just impulsive. Yeah. And instead of, it's like that Edith Eger thing, when something terrible happens to you, like that's not your choice. That's not your fault. You can't decide that. But you have to be able to have that moment where you say, instead of saying, why me? And that's what Okonkwo kept saying, like, why me? Instead of being this why me person, you have to stop and say, all right, so what now? We have these people in our midst. They're trying to change our whole culture. What do we do about it? Instead of being like, why is this happening? It's like, no, well, all right, so this is happening now. We can kind of look back and see how this was happening, but what are we going to do about it? And that's what he was never able to do. And that's the sad part of the story. So and if he said that to himself, you can see the difference. So that what now, that little shift is purpose. Okay, this is happening. This is awful. I got these people behind me though. So what are we going to do about it? And now I have this whole new sense of purpose. He just couldn't see it that way.
No.
And that's what the tragedy.
Do you think that this is something that is a common theme for people who over identify one way, and when that is no longer of use to them or doesn't fit into their environment or their surroundings, they just absolutely have nothing else or no other way to identify.
Listen, I can't believe you're even saying this. Yeah, but
The
first of
rhetorical
all,
question,
yeah,
I guess.
but no, because it's this idea that I've been having lately, and I might have mentioned it to you. It's like not a banking term because I wouldn't know anything about that, but like diversifying your identity. When I think
And
of
liquidating your identity funds.
no, it's really like that. What I mean is, you can't just have like everyone thinks like, oh, I'm this or I'm that. But the reality is, you have to be a few things. So if you diversify your identity, if you think about a guy like Brady, Tom Brady, I guarantee you, after he lost that quarterback situation, he was feeling intense anxiety. Like, what am I supposed to do now? But if you have I think that's why he started a business, and that's why he was like doing a bunch of other things, because it's if you diversify your identity, then parts of it can fail and you're still okay. Like you don't have all your eggs in one basket. That's like good advice, I think.
Really
You,
easy for
there's
the
so many things
280.
like Dave, you're a therapist, you have this great horror community. I mean, there's so many things. You have a very diverse identity. And I think that's a very good thing. Because say people were like, you know what, Dave, horror sucks and it's gone. You're like, that's all right, I'm a therapist. And
Yeah.
and now I need to find out, you know what I mean? Like it's
Really easy for the 2 ADHD guys to say this.
I know. I have 40 identities.
So
I'll be working till 2 a.m.
but I guess that's why for two people like us, who as different as we are, there are similarities in the way that we are very scattered and all over the place, but
Yeah.
also have like numerous ideas and endeavors and projects all the time. And I think that's the difference between us and individuals who just, like I said, like kind of over identify in one aspect of their life, and they don't have that ability to kind of expand on that.
Mhm.
And when there's a challenge to it or a threat to that one thing that they over identify with, it truly leaves them feeling hopeless, empty, alone.
And yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's this idea too that that identity or that goal or whatever that thing is that you see yourself as, if things can happen in your life and change that, and you have to be able to shift with it, and that's okay. So like
Yeah.
Okonkwo being like, all right, well, there comes a time where like I have a cousin who was a firefighter and he got hurt multiple times, and that was like his identity. With police and firemen, that's a lot of times that's their whole identity, and that was hard for him. But he like had to be able to start switching and saying, all right, well, I was this and now I want to be this, and now I have to start shifting into something different. Like you can't be so rigid on your ideas of your identity either, because when you think about it, we're different all the time. We're going to be different in 3 years than we are right now. We're going to be different in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
It's constantly shifting. We have to be okay with that.
I had this icebreaker activity in one of my undergrad courses, and I absolutely loved it, even though I hate like icebreaker activities in general because I hate having to talk in front of classes. But what he did was he had us go around and he asked people to introduce themselves and, tell me something about you. Almost everybody identified with their profession. So, hi, my name's Dave. I work with people with disabilities because that's what I was doing at the time, solely. And then someone else was like, oh, I'm so and so and I do this. And then he like kind of paused at one point and then just had us kind of he like just called it out. He's like, look at how many people sit here and identify as your profession. Are you not a son? Are you not, a brother, a sister,
Mhm.
a partner to somebody? Do you have no other identifying factors? That was so impactful to me, and it was such a small moment, but like it really did highlight to me how much we emphasize certain aspects of our lives, and a lot of times it's like our profession.
Yeah. Or even take how little time we actually take to discover our own identities and like understand who we are. Like you could ask someone like, who are you? Like, what's your identity? And people are gonna have a hard time answering that question. And I think that's okay, right? Because you
You
kind
know,
of just are who you want to be.
and not to
And
get
it's
like
shifting.
too controversial or anything like that, but like it's interesting because individuals who are part of like the LGBTQ community, that's usually one of the first things they'll say, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And I think that's interesting on both ends of it. It's interesting that it's such an important thing for them to identify with when they are, introducing themselves. But it's so interesting that people outside of that community don't identify. It's almost like, so Greg, us being two Caucasian males,
Boring.
when people ask you like your culture or cultural identity, like you like scratch your head for a minute and you're like, and you almost feel like, do I even have a culture? And then you have like other ethnicities around you and they feel like they have such rich culture. I've always been jealous of that. And that's made
Yeah.
me always very fascinated with other cultures. But then I'm like, you know what? There is culture even to us. And
Absolutely.
it's and there is identifying factors to us as well, even if you're not part of the LGBTQ community. Like it's like I just think it's really interesting that people outside of communities that really identify very directly, they almost feel like they don't have their own identity.
So when it comes to identity, I think the more important question, like when that professor should be asking, is if you really want to understand someone, because we've broken this down in the Frankel episode too. Like we are the choices we make. There's no other form of identity besides the next choice you make. That's who you are.
Yeah.
But the real question is, how are you making those choices? And you're making your choices based on your values. So if you can learn someone's values, and if you can have some strong values, like even if you ask someone that question, what are your values? That's a tough question. So if you go online and be like, hey, what's a list of values? And then you look through and you grab like 4 or 5 of them and say, all right, I identify really strongly with these values. I want to live my life based on these values. And that's who you are, right? Because the situations that present themselves, a lot of, the things that make us who we are is situational. Like we're therapists because we were put into situations where that was a possibility for us, right? But if we were living in the jungle, we wouldn't be therapists. We would be something different. I don't know. We might be. I think I like to think I would be some kind of high priestess or priest.
I think priestess. Sure.
And you don't know. And I wouldn't lead with that. I would say I'm,
And just for the record, just so I don't cause any controversy, I am actually not opposed to individuals. I'm like not saying that I think it's odd that individuals in the LGBTQ community state that they identify as any or sexual orientation or gender. I just think it's interesting that people outside of it don't. And I also think that it, to me, when they highlight it, it also identifies other qualities about them that I think also could be noted. So if you're someone in a frequently oppressed group, that means you are probably someone who is very used to adversity and you're probably strong or you might be an advocate or and just there's probably so many other qualities that are included in that
and are interesting. And so here's the thing. And here's the thing about us and this podcast, and that we say things because we're generally trying to understand people better, understand the world better. And if someone was to say, hey, look, Dave, this is why I lead with that, you wouldn't be like, yeah, but I kind of think I don't really agree. You would say, oh, okay, well, thank you for that, because I'm risking offending someone because I want to understand them better. I don't want to be alienated from them. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I think that's important. And I don't want to, and I think, not to be like a conquo, but I think that's part of, something that I critique with the younger generations, where they're so afraid to say the wrong thing, where it's like, well, if I don't say the wrong thing, then I'm never going to get corrected. And I'm always going to keep saying it. And I'm always going to keep thinking it. And I want to know, because like I've told you before, when I first came out of the Navy and I got into I was in like a social, what the hell did I go for undergrad? Whatever. I was in a couple of these classes where it was like
English, right?
Yeah. So, but I had a couple of classes where there was like a gender course, and at first I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? I was that way, I have to admit. But then, I happened to hear a couple of people's stories in the class, and I was like, oh, this is opening my eyes to a whole I would, if I didn't expose myself to this, I wouldn't have understood the situation a lot more clearly now. And now I think I got a better handle on it. And could I have an even better handle on it? Yes. But the only way I'm going to get that is through talking to people, through dialogue, through, through possibly offending someone, and then having them say like, no, this is how I feel about it. And like, oh, okay, now I understand you. I think that's
And
important.
you know, it's funny if people know us in real life. We pose these questions to each other on here, but like I would have those conversations in real life with someone
Absolutely.
who identifies as however, and just to gain clarity. And I've never been, um, responded back with any sort of, uh,
No, not in the real. No,
altercation,
no.
because I think people genuinely can sense that I'm just curious,
Yeah.
or like,
See,
because
that's the
I am a
thing.
listener,
The only way you'll get that lash out is, online or something. If you're being genuine, you're really trying to understand somebody, they're not going to be that way to you.
Yeah.
But if you want to, if you really want to get controversial right here, I have a couple questions for you.
Go ahead.
I mean, so all right, this whole book is kind of getting to the idea that imperialism is bad, and
Sure.
we're invading other people's cultures, but without imperialism, we couldn't possibly have a diverse culture. So you couldn't have one without the other. So is imperialism bad? I don't know.
I don't know that this book is fully passing that judgment. And I say that for obvious reasons. First of all, obviously, Chinua Achebe is someone who, you know, they wrote this book in London.
Yeah. Yep.
He's gone to college. His father became Christian. I think he was a missionary, or his father was, or something along those lines. This is someone who feels like it's just important to highlight culture, and
Yeah.
not to just view a culture as being less than or animalistic just because it's different. And I
Right.
don't know that and like I said, he also, like, his father, like, we identified as someone who probably would have easily have been converted over, and that doesn't mean like we have to hate his father. So I don't know that he's necessarily saying there's anything like he's passing the total critique on
Yeah.
imperialism, more of the struggles of the individuals who went through it.
All right. What about this? Now it's like sending me down a whole line of
Okay.
thought here. So it's dangerous. So we're saying through this book, we're saying it's dangerous and wrong to think we know better than others, who just because they think differently than us, live differently than us, right? And we should be accepting of other cultures we don't agree with. Let them live as we live, whatever, right? So this is kind of that cultural relativity thing. But what if we turn it into this political question where there's always this conservative versus liberal thing? And if we can agree that we shouldn't assume that we know better than others, or we should accept people's thoughts and their cultures and their beliefs, how come we cannot do that politically with this conservative or liberal movement? Obviously, we never take any sides on this podcast because we don't want to alienate half the population. But just
Or each other.
yeah, or each other generally, which is a beautiful thing for us. Which generally speaking, like, shouldn't they both just be fine? Like, why
So
does it?
the book also highlights that this doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's true.
The book highlights that for years people have depicted there's African civilization as being this one way, and he's just trying to bring truth to it, and
Right.
that's going to be met with acceptance, or it's going to be met with rejection. And I think that he is not naive enough to think that everybody read this book and was like, wow, that culture was way more sophisticated than I ever thought, and there's a lot of validity to it. I don't think he expected everybody to read this openly and see his points. I also wanted to go back for a second, because I was talking about how I think the point was more to show the struggles, and also we can't, as a reader, you don't read this thinking that all of Okonkwo's views are right.
Not at all.
He's a flawed man,
Yeah.
as we all are, or woman, or everything else.
Yeah.
So I don't think that he's expecting you to read this strictly through Okonkwo's perspective. He's making Okonkwo his main character and showing you the sympathetic side to somebody who lost their life because they weren't able to handle the events that were occurring with imperialism and all that stuff. So It's interesting. I think that it's less about passing judgment of what's right and wrong and more about showing the dynamics of society, of culture, of individuals as all these things kind of transpired. I think it's more about just showing us and highlighting things than it is about saying this is right and this is wrong. Does that
So
make sense?
yeah, absolutely. And it's making me think too, like that just Okonkwo and the toxic masculinity element to it that we kind of touched on, but we didn't really get back to. And I think this book is, I wish something I had read earlier because I would have pointed to it as being a perfect example of, so there's no denying he's like this masculine, tough person, but is he really see, that's not masculine in my mind because it's all fear-based. It's not strength-based. He's living it like, so that's when you see these toxic masculine guys who are like, treating, women poorly or picking on the weak or whatever. It's because they're scared of how people view them. They don't want to be seen as weak. They need to be seen as these strong men. And real strong masculine people, in my view, we don't you don't need that assurance. You do what you think is right, no matter how people feel about it. You don't need to treat someone poorly to get this sense of like this. That's more narcissism than it is
Sure.
anything else, right? To me.
Can you imagine what Okonkwo would have been doing at Woodstock when Limp Bizkit was playing?
Oh my God. No, I just pictured him being like the whatever, like one of the cast members on Jersey Shore. Like he would fit right in there.
But I think that
And I have to admit, I do watch that show.
Well, I was gonna say, are even those characters aren't a lot of them like contradictions? Like they present as one way, but then they have like these other sides to them
As
that
they
are
develop,
redeeming qualities. Like Paulie D, I mean, hometown boy, obviously,
Yeah.
but he's like actually a nice, good person, right?
He's just, yeah, I've met him. He would not remember. But yeah, no, I think
Didn't
if
you
you look
ask him if you could borrow some hair product from him?
I was like, what's it like to have hair? Must be awesome. I was like, look, if I would have had that same hair, I would have been the famous one, and you would have been on a podcast at 9:30 at night. So yeah, no, it's just this idea that like I think that in the beginning when they're younger, they are more toxic masculine. They really are, and then as they develop and learn, you can see that there's a lot of growth with these guys.
Who's they?
Should we do an episode on Jersey Shore? Are we go? Do I already?
You're talking about Jersey Shore people when you're saying they, right? Still?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've gone too long on Jersey Shore. We've been talking about that. That's a first for this podcast. What about imperialism? Actually, the funny thing is, I read a book just before this, and it's Heart of Darkness, Joseph Conrad. Have you ever read that?
No, I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
It's really small. It's a really short book, and it's an important book, but it depicts the same areas of the world, but just through the lens of the white people. And it's just a very stark difference where you don't, if you were just being fed that, you would be like, you wouldn't really think, oh wow, this is a complex society invading a complex society. And where do we get the right? Like, you don't see that. They keep that from you very purposefully.
I was like reading, Kipling or
absolutely
Darwin, and it's as if you were to take that for face value, it's crazy to think about the messages that are sent in that in their writings about these cultures.
Something else. I mean, you learn more about identity through this, the quote unquote primitive culture than you would through. I mean, I don't know. This is a very identity heavy, really good way of showing how it could be sort of maladaptive. I haven't really seen that portrayed as well in other books.
Yeah. Forever, I always thought of the thing that killing Okonkwo was pride. And I see it a little differently now, which is interesting. Like, it's not pride, it's fear.
Fear.
And I always confused that previously. I always just saw it as he's so proud, he won't bend. But no, he's afraid.
He's afraid to turn around and look at his own darkness. Who am I?
Exactly. And you and I are both obviously so heavy now on, that idea of meaning and purpose. So I think I see it through a different lens than I saw it, 10, 15,
Mhm.
20 years ago.
Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to yourself, Dave.
Yeah. So, yeah. All right. Overall, Greg, would you recommend this book to others?
I would, and I have to be honest though. There was a good chunk of the book though where I was like, wow, Dave's got me reading this pretty boring book.
Yeah,
But
I agree. The first for modern readers, the first quarter, would you say, or maybe one third of the book
yeah,
is really heavy on detail of traditional things, right?
But in the end, as we talked about, that became the most important part of the book. And I forgot to mention something that I think is very important. So at the very end of this book, because what we're talking about here makes sense with that. At the very end of this book, the European man, whoever's in charge, he walks away from this dramatic scene where he's, Okonkwo is just hanging there, and he's like, "Oh, this is gonna be part of my book." Quote, "The pacification of the primitive tribes of the lower Niger." So what happens is he says that in this whole story of Okonkwo might take up a whole paragraph in his book, which which makes me think that this whole book, this whole like story is just a critique on the white, I don't know, what do you say, the white man bringing civilization to these people, to this culture, right?
Yeah.
So when they're really just bringing chaos to this already settled group of people they don't really need them to be there. So the idea that a paragraph is enough to cover the whole story of this man's life and all the complexity of it is, and just it, you have to keep it to a paragraph. Otherwise, you have to admit that these people are just as enlightened as anybody else, and they don't need you to come here and push your culture on them.
Yeah. But and you got to think though, at this time though, that must have felt like it was not the case. Like
Not if you're
they viewed them and said like, "Oh, they need our culture."
well. So I think that the powers at B, whoever they are, men like Cecil Rhodes and like important people who were kind of like developing, like understanding the world and trying to gather resources, were like, oh, we need whatever's in those mines, diamonds and ivory or whatever we get from this part of the world, and we have to create a reason to be there. And mission work kind of works, and it's so insidious that you can trick the people that are going to invade for you into thinking they're doing the right thing just to bring you. It's just imperialism's a really kind of dark thing, but I guess we got a diverse world from it. I don't know.
I guess it's interesting though, because much of the way imperialism works, we've heard in different variations how cults get started.
Yeah.
You recruit people and then they become the recruiters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they are essentially the ones who you depend on to carry out your word, to gain your following, and to carry out your mission.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
So
I guess we'll be. Dave's got his mind on a cult. I guess we'll be doing a cult soon.
Yeah, I keep thinking about cults these days. I can't help it.
I know. It's okay.
I tried. I put a book out there. Now I want cults again.
Yep.
All right. So
I think we covered it, right?
I think we covered it. Yeah. I'm hoping somebody finds this topic interesting, or someone even knows the book or says, "Hey, let me read this book," and then listen to their episode. I do think people will enjoy it if they have the context that we're describing. But then again, maybe this is something that not everyone will connect with. We'll find out. But if you do and you want to share your thoughts, we'd love to hear them. I can't say it enough. The people who have been reaching out after an episode and being like, "Oh, I just listened to this," or "Oh, here's some thoughts about this," or "Hey, let me share my own personal story about this." I love it. I love hearing everybody talking about that stuff and just starting these dialogues. Greg, you know what it makes me think? At some point when we have the communication that's built up enough for this, we need a place for people to be able to talk to each other about these things.
I know.
We need a forum of some sort, or a Discord. Is that
Oh,
what the kids
yeah.
are doing these days? I don't know.
Like where you mean where we could talk to the whole group?
Yeah, like people.
I would
could
love
sign
that.
up and
Dave, you know I wouldn't have any idea how to do anything like that.
I know for a while there was like Slack. I don't know if people are still using Slack. Man, we're old. We're
Yeah.
old. We might be too old to be doing this.
No, there's got to be a way
We need to hire
besides just email.
one of those younger generational people who are going to say like, "Oh, what are you guys going to do for me?" And we'll be like, "Shut up.
Just get to work.
Get to work
for free." You know, like we do.
You think we're getting paid? What?
Yeah, no kidding.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you feel so compelled, we have a couple of ways that you can support the podcast. And we absolutely would be so thankful and grateful to you if you decided to do either of these. But the first thing, and probably the easiest thing you can do, hop on to Apple or anywhere you can leave a rating or review, which I think is mostly Apple. But Spotify, you can just leave stars. But if you could leave a rating and review on Apple, that would be so appreciated, because doing that kicks in some algorithm and the podcast gets more shares. So we become more widely listened to. And then we, in turn, feel more internal motivation to continue.
Yeah.
The other thing is we actually set up a subscription support system on Buzzsprout. So the link for that is, I don't actually know, but if you were to Google unconventional therapists subscription, I'm sure it will pop right up. It's under Buzzsprout. It's very, very cheap, just a couple bucks a month.
We definitely need a better system than that.
I know. Maybe we can share it in our bio. I'll put it in our bio on Instagram. So basically what that does, it just offers the opportunity to pitch in a few bucks or do like a monthly donation type thing. Maybe down the road we'll get some things to actually make perks and stuff, but for now we don't have that. But our intent for that money is to go back into this. So whether that's creating ads or getting better equipment or just ability to do better research. So one of those ways, that's basically what that's doing.
The people will probably say, first spend the money on better research.
Yeah, like, can you also have someone pick your topics?
Yeah.
No, we love our topics.
We do.
We do. So, all right. Well, everybody, hope you had a great Thanksgiving. If you celebrated, or whatever you do celebrate, essentially, we just hope that you had a good time, and hopefully you were able to spend some time with family and friends and loved ones. And we look forward to our episodes coming up in December, which we will be trying to be as creative as possible with that whole lineup and do some themed and maybe some loosely themed ones. We'll see. All right, everybody. We are going to wrap up. Have a great night. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the winter solstice.
Yes, please do.
Remember, Krampusnacht is coming.
That's right. 6th. That's right.
All that other good stuff. See you later. Bye.